Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. I was just looking through my back catalogue the other day and I realised it's been a little while since I crafted a chain with wire for you. So today's video is going to be a double spiral link chain. Now whilst I wouldn't recommend hanging off it, you can't use it to build bridges, it's a decorative chain, it is really pretty and very easy to create. So let's head down to the board, take a look at the project and then let's get making together. There are two components to this chain. One is a standard rosary link, which I will take you through, although there is a video that features just rosary linking. If you're brand new and you want a bit of a refresher, I'll pop a link just up here for you now. This is the design that we're going to work on. So it's a double spiral linked by rosary chain. So it makes a really attractive chain. I've made it in a couple of different colours here so it's easier to see what's going on. In terms of the wire that we're going to be using, we'll be working in 1mm or 18 gauge all the way through. And there are two lengths of wire that we'll be working with. I've also put aside some 8mm round beads. I'm going to be working with rose quartz. They have a lovely sized drill hole that fits on the wire really nicely. Believe it or not, I managed to check this time. So let's just pop that up into the corner. So the main tools today, we will a little bit later on, as a bit of a bonus, I'll be showing you how to make a hook clasp, and I would recommend using some multi-step bell makers or a lovely round form such as a strong pencil for those. You'll be using your flush cutters and chain nose pliers, and either round nose pliers or your memory wire pliers if you prefer. So the first thing we're going to do is to create that spiral. Now in order to work with a lighter chain, which is easier to handle, so this again is 1mm gauge, I've chosen to hammer some strength into the spirals. What you could do if you wanted to is work with a slightly heavier gauge wire, so you could use 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire to create this design. So we're going to start just by warming that wire through. Now I've created an 8.5 inch bracelet. To create the 8.5 inch bracelet, I have taken 2.5 inch lengths of that 1mm gauge wire, and I'm using 6 of these. So that's 6 of the 2.5 inch wire lengths. When we first start creating the first side of the spiral, I just popped a little mark on my round nose pliers so I know whereabouts to create that spiral. I'm going to be popping the end of the wire into the pliers a little bit further down than I normally would, and again, as I say, I've used a black marker pen just to show myself where that size is. Normally I would start a spiral quite close to the tip of the pliers, but today I want a really lovely round form with an open centre. So very slowly, just going to start creating the first part of that spiral. Once I've got a bit of a hook shape on the end, then I'll close it up to create that circular form. Now that actually looks just a little bit larger than I want it to be. So if I pop that back on my pliers, I'll see that yes, it's a little bit further down than I wanted it to be. So I can just open that back out and just try to draw that round a little bit closer. That looks a little bit better to me. So I'm going to create a double spiral on this side. So from the starting point, and I'm just pushing that into my non-dominant hand, I'm going to rotate around that central aperture around about 2 times. So not quite, but almost 2 times. And I'm just leaving it shy of that. We've got around about 1 inch left on the other end. A little bit of warmth goes a long way with wrapping and working with wire. So I'm going to start on the other side, moving that spiral in the opposite direction. So if I begin to move that around those pliers at the mark I have just put on the pliers, or as I said earlier, you could use your little memory wire pliers if you prefer. What I will then do is start pushing this form to create a second spiral in the opposite direction. So rotate those around until they sit centrally. Now if you find that you've got more of a gap between the tail of the wire, the cut end, and the central part of your figure of 8 or your little squirly whirly design, then you can just mess with those until that gap is centralized. So you might want to make your central aperture just a tiny bit smaller, and in that case you'll be able to get those two cut ends to sit opposite one another, but sitting as it is right now is perfect for this design. So before I hammer, I'm going to make sure that everything is completely flat, taking care to avoid getting it caught in any box joint of your pliers. Pre-strengthening the wire seems like a bit of a waste of time, but believe me, it isn't, because it just means that everything is going to sit that little bit more where you want it to. So I'm grabbing my steel block and my chasing hammer. I'm just going to move that to one side so I don't hit the camera. What I want to do is to hammer this a good 3 or 4 times really solidly, as straight down as I can possibly muster. So I went for 5 times there just because I'm a bit of a rebel and that's what it felt like doing today. And you can see that we've just squashed that down really nice and smooth and strong. So to make an 8.5 inch bracelet, as I have done, which is a little bit large for me, but never mind, I'm sure somebody will enjoy it. So to create that 8.5 inch bracelet, I'm going to create 6 of these little forms. So I've got myself a little series of 6 double spirals to work with. Now we're just going to rosary link them together, and as a bonus at the end of the video I'll show you how to make a nice hook clasp which works well with the aesthetic of this bracelet. I've cut a series now, again in 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and I need 5 lengths. They're around about 3¼ inches in length. It's the same gauge, but I'm using a different colour just so that we can work this bracelet up a little bit more easily visually. So 3¼ inches, 1mm or 18 gauge wire. I'm just going to give that a quick smooth through. Something else that I've done with all of the cut pieces of wire today is made sure that they're flush cut on both ends, just so that I don't have to trim anything away later when it's all bunched up. So what we're going to do is grab the bead that you have chosen. I've got some 8mm round rose quartz, and they've got a really good drill aperture, just slightly larger than 1mm across. If I pop that in centrally, I'm going to use my flat facing pliers. These are my bent chain nose pliers, and I'm just going to pop a bend on either end, just imagining that you can keep that bead still. And I've got one going one way and one going the other way, and you should have a gap on either side. It's just about the distance of the tip of my pliers there on either side. Now again, you can use your round nose pliers for this, or you can use your multi-step bell makers, or you could even go for those memory wire pliers. I'm going to be approximating just slightly smaller than the first loop we made, which is the centre of the double spirals. I'm going to pop a loop on either end of my little connector. So I tend to go half a way around first to get a little shepherd's crook shape, and then draw the wire over the top in the other direction. So that's nice and closed up. The reason I close it up at this stage is just to pop my pliers across, put a little bit of strength and intention in by squishing only on the single pass of wire, not where the wire crosses over. And then I'm just going to lift that up as if it's a jump ring that we're opening. So we're going to pop in one of the links on one end, like so, and then just push that back down together. Now I often use 2 pairs of pliers to close up a rosary link, and what we're going to do here is just hold across the circular form. It's a little bit trickier. You might find that the loop goes sideways, just to give you the room to grip without squashing that double spiral. I'm going to push that wire around the core to begin with, just 1 and a bit times, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other end. So let's make that spiral sit neatly, the pliers sit neatly. Bring the wire all the way around, take a look at the size, does it match the other end? It's just a little bit smaller I think, so I'll put my pliers in and just open that out, draw the wire across the top. Do those loops look the same? Reasonably. Yeah, that's not too bad. Just close that up for a second, give it a bit of a strengthening, make sure that you're happy that that's good and strong before, if I hold that sideways, just opening up as if it's a jump ring. Pop another one of those double spirals into position at the other end, close that up, and then we're going to grip across again. You might need to just flick the double spiral over to one side, push the wire all the way around 1.5 times. And then what you can do is see how much you can close up the gap. So what I'm going to do here is hold across like so, and then I'm going to grab another pair of flat facing pliers. If you struggle with strength in your digits, then this might be of help to you. And I'm just going to nibble that wire around, but I'm just opening and closing subtly, and that just closes the wire really, really neatly in a spiral around that core. And I'm only going to do about half a turn at a time. So let's grip across that loop on the one end. My left hand is not as useful as my right, so it sometimes struggles to get into position. And then just opening and closing. If I tilt the wire up towards the camera slightly, and just opening and closing as I rotate that set of pliers around, and we're just closing that loop up really, really neatly. So what I will do is just a little on either side until I've completely closed the loop. You do only need about 3 inches for this design with a 1mm bead, but I like to have just a little bit extra in case I accidentally make the gap a little bit wide. So I think I'm probably going to be able to get most of this wire wrapped, but there will be a little residue to cut away. And it pays you to cut that little residue away before you get too tight. You'll feel the bead starts to slow down. It doesn't want to spin, and that's because you're getting really, really close with those wires. So what we're going to do is look and assess. Are we happy that that's relatively equal and even? And then I'm going to cut across just by putting my finger on the end of the wire. What that does is just it supports it from flicking off into infinity or a dog's eyeball or something. So there's a tiny tail on the other side, so we're just going to trim that away as well. And again, if you can just catch that and stop it going, it saves your vacuum cleaner from getting destroyed as well. So you can see there's just a tiny little bit of sticky up wire on either end. Can you see how that's elevated just here? So in order to tidy that away, I'm going to be very respectful of my bead and just close the pliers around and then draw them in the direction that the wire moves. Exactly the same on the other end. And that just closes everything up, and you've got a really neat and tidy link for your chain. And you'll just continue to repeat that with your lengths of 3¼ inch wire and your spirals. This took 2½ inches, remember. I've just done them in different colours so it's easier to see. What I tend to do with projects like this is piecework. So I'll make all my spirals, and then I'll make all of the centre pieces to those rosary linked sections that look like funky little gemstone TIE fighters. And I'll get all those lined up, and then I'll sit down and maybe put the telly on, treat myself to a bit of relaxation time, and just create the chain as I'm watching the box. So let's head down to the board and see what that looks like, and then I'll show you how to create that hook to close the bracelet up altogether. So I've connected all of my bits and bobs together. I've got my double spirals all connected with rosary links. What we're going to do now is to create a beaded hook to finish the design off and create a closure for your bracelet. So it's going to look something like this. We're going to be using again that 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and I have a flush cut on both ends, and the length is around about 5½ inches. I'm going to give that a bit of a smooth through to begin with, and then around about 1¼ inches from the end I'm going to turn that over. Grab my round nose pliers, you could use your bail makers if you preferred, and create a wrapped loop. But before we close that wrapped loop up, I'm just going to give that a quick strengthen, and then open that up as if it was a jump ring. So just pulling half of that away so you get a nice gap to work with. And let's slide one end of our bracelet chain in, close that up neatly. And let's pop that out of the way. And what we're going to do is to grip hold across that circular form. Again, you'll find the double spiral just kicks out of the way. And we're going to wrap around about 1½ to 2 times. Now that's a little bit baggy, so if that comes away like it did for me just then, you can squish that down until it sits neatly against your wrapped loop, and just slow down, try not to rush. So I've got 1½ wraps on my little wrapped loop just for now, and I'm going to leave that because I'd like to equalise that later. So the next thing we're going to do is add in a bead. I quite like the idea of a beaded hook for this design because it just looks seamless with the rest of the bracelet chain. So I am again working with a reasonably large drill hole, just over 1mm. The bead itself is 8mm and it's rose quartz. So I'm going to warm this wire through nicely. And what we want to do is take a distance that is halfway between the end of the loop and the end of the wire. I'm just going to eyeball that and bring the wire back on itself. I think slightly this way perhaps. Turn that over. It's just a little bit past the end of the loop. That's fine because that gives me a little bit spare to work with. So I need this section to be quite straight and I want a good, firm, solid closed up, almost like a hairpin on the end. One of the easiest ways you can achieve this is to grip across both of those pieces of wire, quite close to the end, avoiding the box joint, and then just casually, slowly, not casually she says, but just slowly close that up. The longer you spend on it, the neater it will be. If it twists, you can just flick it back over, but the closer you are to the end, the better that's going to close up for you. You can then just smooth that through to get a nice straight line. If you mark the wire a little bit, don't worry, it does get better with practice. So what we're looking to do now is to create a bend with this last little section on the end, and I want that to come over the top of the other piece of wire. So if I grip firmly and pull that over, you'll see exactly what I'm going on about. So you've got a hairpin at one end, and you've got the wire returning back and then across itself. What we're going to do now is to create a wrapped loop on this side, imagining that this is your loop. So that's what it's going to function as. So if I carefully line the wire up, and what you'll find as you squish down is that this little end section will kick up slightly. That's absolutely fine, that's what you need it to do. If there's a little bit of a gap, don't worry about it. Do mind your fingers on this sticky outy bit though, and that's why it's important to make sure you've got flush cuts before you begin. You're much less likely to actually scar your hands if that's flush cut than if it's slightly jagged. You might poke yourself in the finger and it's not fun, but it's a little bit better. So we're going to take that little kick up of wire and we're going to start bringing that around. You can put as much pressure as possible down on your pliers here. If you struggle with grip strength, you can hold that on the desk and press down. The idea being that we don't want too much movement to be occurring. We want to try and retain that nice straight nature. So I'm going to bring that wire all the way around for a second turn. And the reason that we left this tail of wire sticking out here is so that we can replicate what we did on each of those rosary links, which is try and have the same number of rotations of wire on either side of the bead. And you may like to use a second set of pliers just to hold the loop. So I'm going to take that wire around a second time, just opening and closing slowly. Leave a little kick of wire out at the bottom there, I think, whilst we do the same on this side. So very, very firmly gripping hold of this straight line that we've created, and then we're going to take that tail around. So it's slightly baggier on this side, because what I don't want to do is to pull too hard and draw this wire too firmly. If I start drawing this section of wire, the end will just come out slightly to the right, and I'd much rather it was straight, but that this coil was slightly larger. So you can very, very slowly just bring that tail over the top until you get two halves on your rosary link section that are reasonably similar. And once they are similar, I'm just going to tighten that up slightly by squishing. Once they are similar in number of rotations, we can take those little tails away. The only reason I put my finger so close when I'm trimming is because it stops the wire kicking up and hitting the camera. It's an expensive thing when that goes wrong. So let's just snip that away, or snicked if you're a Wolverine fan like myself. And then what we're going to do is just ensure that those ends are nice and flat and flush to the core. Rotate those pliers around again, we'll smooth that end over. When you're doing the side that has the elongated length of wire, just be careful that you don't pull too hard, just rotate gently to smooth that down. Now we've got a nice straight line coming out of the end, so we just need to turn this into a hook now. So what I tend to do is just make sure that I'm happy with everything. It's much easier to adjust this now than when you've actually created the hook. what I'm going to do is to draw this wire down and away from me. So if I just pinch very, very firmly and draw that down, trying to keep that wire as straight as possible. You could give it a very gentle hammering, just flat if you wanted to. And I'm going to grab my bail making pliers, and I think number 4 is probably a good size. So you can see that I've put those in against the straight section of wire, and I'm just going to turn that over and then draw the tip back down and over the top so that it meets on that rosary linked section. If I remove those pliers now, you can see that that's almost touching the bead. And then what we're going to do is just put a little kick on the tail. You can close that up. Obviously now you can't hammer it anymore, but when it was straight you could have given it a gentle tap. So let's just smooth this chain out, and you can find the last double spiral at the other end and just slide that in. So it's an absolute piece of cake to make. You can make them up as piecework. My finished bracelets measure between 8 1/4, this one's probably closer to 8, and 8 1/2 inches, based on there being 6 beads, 6 double spiral sections, 5 rosary linked sections, and 1 bead in the final hook. So you can play around with the gauges of wire. You can take the spirals to a heavier gauge. Do check that your beads fit on the core of your rosary link. Rosary linked wire can be a little bit finer because you have very, very firm closures. I would recommend, if you can, making heavier wire for your double spirals. It will give you a stronger chain. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed making this double spiral chain link with me today. If you're liking the content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you back again very, very soon. Bye for now.